Hello everyone, welcome back to Upside Down Data. Today I want to talk about ADA and what type of catalyst it might be looking for before it can start putting more moves back to the upside. If you like the content, remember to subscribe to the channel, give the video a like, and follow us on Twitter where we put out regular updates about our risk indicators and more. So what I'm showing you here first to kind of get us started is just the price action of ADA over time color-coded to the output of our risk model, the UDPI, or Upside Downside Potential Indicator. And what you'll see is so each dot here is a day, and each day is color-coded based on the output of our risk model. And a red, the more red, the closer to 5, the higher the risk. The closer to dark green, the -5, the lower the risk. And you'll see that over time, the risk indicator does a good job of identifying these low and high risk points in ADA's history. And it did that recently. We actually saw this play out coming out of the summer. A flash green, this low risk zone, all the way up into this red territory as ADA put in a new all-time high at around $3. Before now, we've seen this big correction back to the downside. So risk has been falling ever since. Interestingly, it dipped a little bit into the green, but then the model kind of updated itself. It actually got a little bit more hesitant about ADA, and sure enough, we actually ended up having this fall down here. What I want to talk about now is what might ADA need to kind of catalyze this move to the upside. One of the things I think is interesting to look at with just the risk level of ADA currently is that if we just look at the raw output of the model across time with the UDPI on the y-axis, you'll notice that the risk level right now is actually lower than it hit during the summer, which is quite interesting, right? We put a 3x move coming out of the summer. The fact that the risk level is actually lower than that now is quite interesting. That might suggest that ADA has a lot of upside potential. It's kind of accruing, it's storing up that it might be able to unleash when given the next opportunity, when something kind of kicks it into the higher gear. Now, that doesn't mean that reversal is imminent by any means necessarily. There's no guarantee that that's going to happen, right? There's more room that ADA could fall to the downside. So to say that ADA is guaranteed to now shoot back up to the upside is reading beyond what this data can tell us. We don't know if that's going to happen. It certainly could fall lower. But what it is certainly telling us is that the risk-reward ratio of ADA is becoming more favorable, and that if some kind of bullish catalyst kicks into gear that really starts pushing ADA into the upside, it could actually have a pretty far way to go. It could move quite explosively to the upside potentially if it does anything like we saw coming out of the summer. Now again, part of that's going to be dependent on broader market conditions. Does Bitcoin get its feet under it? Is it able to move back to the upside? That might be one thing that would help, but there could be other fundamental catalysts that could help, and I'm going to talk about one of those things I've been thinking about here in a minute. But just to give a little bit more context before I get into that, the current exact level of the UDPI for ADA right now is at -2.46. So that is getting quite low. We have entered this kind of green sector of the gauge, but again, there still is more room to the downside. There is more, downside potential to be realized if ADA needs to before it can put moves back to the upside. So this doesn't guarantee a reversal, but certainly the risk reward ADA is looking quite favorable and more favorable than it's looked for a long time, actually, which is quite interesting. And one of the things that's also important to note here is that though ADA is currently very low risk, it's not the only one that's sitting down at similar levels. Look at Phantom, look at HBAR, which is even further below. Look at DOT, which is quite far down there. It's not to say that ADA is not unique in being in these low risk levels. And so one of the things that I think is important to think about is that if we're going to think about which of these assets might really be able to put moves to the upside next, risk on its own can't necessarily tell us which will be first, right? What it's saying is that at some point in the future, these assets might be able to then go and realize all of this upside potential, which would be quite, good for their price action. But we don't really know which one will be the first out of the gate, right? Coming out of the summer, ADA was actually like one of the first to really spring out of the gate. It was one of the first to really explode, put in a massive move to the upside, and then a lot of other assets followed after. We don't know necessarily if ADA is going to do that again. But one of the things I'm looking at in terms of a potential catalyst that could kick ADA into gear, and it might depend a little bit on when these catalysts hit in terms of broader market conditions, but it could have something to do with the ecosystem that's being built for ADA. So we know that the ecosystem is still kind of getting its feet under it. Not a whole lot has launched yet on our Cardano, but a lot of things are being developed. A lot of things are being created to be put onto Cardano. And so this could be a great sign for ADA. One of the things that we've been seeing coming out of the summer and in the more recent months is it seems like the market has really been valuing these chains that can show not only development on their ecosystem, but also adoption. A lot of money, for example, getting locked up into things like decentralized finance. So for example, if we flip over here to DeFi Llama, what you'll see is that a lot of these assets that are in the top 10 for total value locked have been performing quite well recently, right? Avalanche put in massive moves to the upside. Terra has been performing quite well recently. Polygon has done quite well. Phantom had some huge explosive moves. It's been correcting now, but it had put in a lot of moves to the upside. And then, of course, Solana also exploded as well, probably partially on the back of its DeFi ecosystem, but also probably things like NFTs and things like that. But certainly when we look at this, it does seem like the market values these ecosystems. Another one to look at is the crypto, crypto.com coin, the Kronos CRO coin, which really exploded in its value after this big DeFi news, a lot of this new DeFi development that's been going on that blockchain. And so a lot of this is suggesting that the market really values thriving ecosystems. And so one of the things that we can see is that coming down the pipe, there's a lot of stuff that's being built on ADA, right? Look at all these DEXs that are being built. Look at all these DeFi protocols that are being built, these NFT and other marketplaces that are being built. There's a lot of things that are coming, but they haven't all necessarily been realized yet. And if they are able to be kind of created, and if they get a lot of adoption, that could be a huge bullish tailwind potentially for ADA, which could really spring it out of where it kind of currently sits. And of course, one of the ones that's talked about recently, probably one of the first out of the gate from some of these different ecosystem dApps, is Sunday Swap. So this is one that is currently being tested. Its rollout is probably not too terribly far away. We'll have to see. But one of the things that'll be interesting is if the launch of Sunday Swap, as long as with some of these other apps, if these kind of tend to coincide with more favorable market conditions. So let's say, for example, Bitcoin takes another month or so to get its feet under it, but then is able to start moving back to the upside in January, February, something of next year. If the launches of some of these ecosystem plays end up coinciding with that kind of market condition, that could be a huge bullish tailwind that might really kind of catapult ADA back up again off of these deep corrections that it's been seeing. Another thing that might also help ADA to some extent is the fact that we have been seeing all of these hacks of DeFi protocols. And one of the things that ADA obviously prides itself on is its very kind of cautious and very thorough way that it develops code. The whole kind of moniker of Cardano is not to rush things, to have very formalized processes to review code before things go out to make sure there aren't these disastrous bugs that might be there. Now, obviously, the Cardano development team is not going to necessarily be involved with all of these different projects that are being built. It's a permissionless network. Anyone can build on it that they want. But if the general culture might be more towards that cautious kind of testing approach, and certainly Sunday Swap seems to be going in that direction. They seem to be taking a more cautious approach before launching to really make sure they iron out as many kinks as they can before doing it. That could be a reason why people might actually look at DeFi on a chain like Cardano a little more favorably if they might have more confidence that these kind of hacks aren't going to happen. And we can look, this is showing us the cumulative list of all these different hacks starting back in beginning of 2020. There have been a lot of different hacks and exploits that have happened in DeFi, which certainly is a risk that exists with DeFi, right? If you're putting your money into these decentralized protocols, there's always going to be that risk that there could be some kind of bug or some kind of exploit that exists in the code that someone might take advantage of. And it's just one of the risks that exists. But if the ecosystem develops a little more cautiously on something like ADA, if it follows kind of the broader example that the main development of the Cardano chain follows with this more thorough process, that might be a reason why people might view this a little bit more favorably. And so if that happens, that could just be one more reason why this ecosystem development could be a catalyst, that people kind of trust it more than they might trust some ecosystems on other chains. Now, again, none of that's to say that this is guaranteed to happen, that this is guaranteed to be this huge bullish tailwind that it could be. But certainly if the market continues to value these ecosystems like it had been, that could be one thing to really push ADA back to the upside. Now, to kind of wrap us up, I want to talk a little bit more just about ADA's recent price action and some things to be kind of keeping in mind. So the first thing I want to talk a little bit about is just some of these kind of key moving averages. So I'm going to just get rid of the 200-day right now so we can just look, or sorry, I'm going to get rid of the 100-day, keep the 200-day. One of the things that is important to note recently is we actually have had what's known as a death cross for ADA, and that's when it's usually defined as when the 50-day moving average has fallen below the 20-day moving average. And what that tends to coincide with is these big downturns in the market, this kind of loss of momentum moves to the downside. Now, one thing I think is important to mention, though, is just because we've had a death cross, that doesn't necessarily mean that ADA has to go into a protracted bear market or downtrend, right? You know, a death cross will always have to happen if you're going to go into a big bear market, but it doesn't necessarily mean you have to guarantee do that. And I think we can just see this if we look back at ADA's history. So in the first time ADA had a death cross was here, back in August of 2019, and that did actually correspond to a pretty long downturn, a pretty extended bear market. But we can also flip back over here to around where we had the March 2020 crash, and there was another death cross that happened from that. But then before too long, we just popped right back up it, and in fact, price only really appreciated after that death cross there. And so what I want to point out is I've seen some articles and some people on Twitter kind of talking about this death cross of ADA as being this really doom and gloom thing where they're saying that ADA is, you know, guaranteed to be going this long downtrend after that. I don't think that even ADA's own history supports that, much less of just what death crosses can do in the market before. Really, all it's doing is just confirming what we already knew, which is that ADA is in kind of this downtrend here that has been protracted enough that we've seen this crossover, but that doesn't guarantee that ADA is screwed. But certainly what we'd like to see for ADA is for it to be able to get above some of these support levels that it's fallen below. You know, we'd love to see it get above the 50-day. We'd love to see it be able to reclaim the 200-day, then even the 100-day moving average. That might be suggesting that it's really been able to put in some moves, and if it can hold those levels, then again, after it gets up there, that would be a very bullish sign. Another thing that we can look at is just the RSI, the relative strength index for ADA. And one of the things you'll notice is that we actually are kind of retesting, if not breaking, some of these lows that we saw back in the summer. Now, that's not to say that we can't go lower, right? You know, ADA has actually put in lower readings on the RSI, like the 2020 crash, as well as some of these downward moves in this kind of bear market have touched similar levels. And so this isn't guaranteed to say we're moving back to the upside. But certainly, if we repeat something more out of the summer, this could be a staging area where maybe ADA has to kind of consolidate at these lower levels before it can start moving back up to the upside. And this would also kind of be confluent with what we're seeing with the UDPI risk indicator, where it's saying the risk is actually lower than it was back here in the summer. And so if we see risk really start bottoming out, that might suggest that ADA's kind of found a bottom, might be able to move back to the upside. Now, again, we're just going to have to wait and see what happens. Nothing is guaranteed at all, and a lot of this is going to depend on broader market conditions. You know, what does Bitcoin do? Does Bitcoin have another big dump, another crash, or is it able to consolidate, put more moves back to the upside, in which case I would expect ADA, frankly, along with all the other altcoins, or a lot of other altcoins, to be able to have moves back to the upside as well if Bitcoin starts showing some strength. And we'll just have to wait and see what happens. But certainly, the risk for ADA has been falling. We'll have to see how far it can go. But I think it could very well be the case that if ADA can really kind of reclaim some of these bullish, a more bullish narrative, it can really get its ecosystem going in a thriving way, we might be able to see ADA put some explosive moves back to the upside, potentially even similar to what we saw out of the summer, given that we're now actually at a lower level of risk and a similar price level that we were back in the summer. But we'll just have to wait and see. You know, it's a waiting game. We're just going to have to see what happens. If you like the content, remember to subscribe to the channel, give the video a like, and follow us on Twitter. And remember, with the UDPI, we're all going to make it.